This week we're going to be studying about cost curves. One of the underlying premises of cost curves is the law of diminishing returns. This law states that when additional inputs are added to one fixed input, the returns to the variable input will increase at first and then they will begin to decline at some point. As you can see from the graph, as we continue to add workers or inputs, we see that the results of those workers will first increase, then it will start falling off and eventually end up being negative. I like to use the example of a small business that is in the jeans making business. And so they have their fabric, they have their scissors and thread and their patterns, etc. And so now they're going to start making jeans. They have one sewing machine to work with, and as we add the first worker, the daily output from that first worker is 15 jeans. And then when we add the second worker, we find that that second worker is able to contribute 25 jeans per day. And then when we add the third worker, we see that the third worker is able to contribute 30 jeans per day. We might say, well, why is that production going up for each worker? Well, it's because of specialization. It's because one may be doing something faster than the other. It may be that they are able to create some shift work so that one comes in earlier and starts cutting the patterns or starts cutting the jeans from the patterns, etc. So they are able to work together as a team and to get, as a result, get more output per worker. But then as we continue to add additional workers to just one sewing machine, we see that things start to fall off. So the fourth worker only contributes 28 and the fifth worker something even less. We have a graph that we can show this. This is marginal product and the number of workers. And because of the shape of that curve, we see that the marginal product first increases and then will fall off. We can relate this also to the cost per gene. We can, so I did a little table there. If we were to say that each worker is paid a daily wage of $100, and we take a look, and from our earlier graph, we see that the first worker added 15, the second 25, the third 30, the fourth 28, and the fifth 20. If we were to take that $100 per day and divide that by the output for each worker, we see that the first worker, the cost per gene for that worker is $6.67. The second worker, because he contributed more, his cost per gene is $4. The third, $3.33. The fourth, $3.57. So we hit a bottom with 3 workers, and then the marginal cost starts going up. And so that's, I like to say that that marginal cost curve is shaped like the Nike swoosh. If we now take a look and see what our costs are going to be in the production process, we see that our costs are made up of fixed cost, which is typically rent, those things that don't change with our level of output, our variable costs, which do change with the level of output. Typically, the most often used variable cost would be labor, and fixed cost plus variable cost is going to equal total cost. If we were to divide the total cost by the quantity, this will give us average quantity. So average total cost is equal to average fixed cost plus average variable cost. Jumping back to our marginal product curve and our marginal cost curve, it's important to understand the relationship between those two. When marginal product is increasing, marginal cost is decreasing. When marginal product is decreasing, then marginal cost is increasing. So if you take a look at these two curves where marginal cost is at a minimum, marginal product is at its peak. I want to introduce you to the marginal average rule. This says that average curves are intersected by the marginal curve at their minimum. If we were in a room of a group of people and we had all of those people go outside, and then we said, okay, I want you to come in the room one at a time. If the first worker in the room, and we're going to measure the height of each person as they come in the room, if the first person in the room is 5 feet tall, then the average is 5. If the second person in the room is 6 feet tall, now you have 2 people in the room, that marginal person or the additional person brought the average up. 5 and 6 feet is 5.5 feet. And then if you brought in a third person, if that third person was 4 feet tall, then that margin would come way down because the average is 5.5. So as long as the margin is below the average will be coming down. As soon as the marginal curve intersects and goes above the average curve, then the marginal curve will be pulling the average curve up. This is important in understanding the relationship between our cost curves. The average fixed cost curve is always downward sloping to the right. This is simply because the cost per unit will come down as we continue to input quantity, because remember, it's a fixed cost, and as we add quantity, that cost per unit is going to decrease. On the other hand, the average variable cost curve is first going to come down and then start heading up, because that marginal cost curve will pull it up. And also, this is because of the underlying premise, which we talked about at the very beginning, the law of diminishing returns. Now we want to take a look and say, how will these two curves impact the average total cost curve? Which is the gorilla in the room? And it turns out that the gorilla in the room is average variable cost. It has the biggest impact on that average total cost. Now we're able to look at our four cost curves. We have our average fixed cost curve, which is always coming down across the spectrum of quantity. As the quantity gets bigger, the average fixed cost per unit is going to decrease. Because of the law of diminishing returns, our marginal cost curve first comes down and then starts heading up. And it intersects the average variable cost at its minimum. And then we said that because average variable cost will overpower average fixed cost, we see that average total cost is above average variable cost and average fixed cost, because it's the sum of those two curves. And we also see that marginal cost intersects the average total cost at its minimum. These are the cost curves that we're going to use when we start studying the various business structures. Again, those are pure competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. This is the 8th week, and the 9th week we have our exam. So after the exam, we'll look at these cost curves again, and we'll use them in building our models of our various business structures. I do hope you have a good week, and remember that just a week from Monday, that second exam will open up. So I wish you the best in terms of this week and preparing for the exam. Signing off.